Hello, family. Welcome to JFK Today, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I'm your host, Janaya Future Khan, champ yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. Let's get dialed in. I barely know how to cover this overview. Yeah, we're going to be talking about rat birth control. It's a real story. I wish I could say I made this up. Ta-Nehisi versus America, a little bit on gerrymandering, and then, of course, my personal favorite, which is Israel's war against everybody. So, first, let's deal with this rat birth control thing. You heard me correctly. The bill is called Flacco's Law, and it came about in part because a beloved owl in New York City, where this bill has gone through, beloved owl ate some rat poison and ended up dying. So the rats are out of control. They're in the streets of New York. And I got to tell you, one of the funniest things to come out of Eric Adams and his basically loser run was that he decided that he personally was going to tackle the rat problem and made a role called the Rat Tsar. And that person's entire job is fighting the rats, which means that there has to be a rat king or queen, because that's the way that these things work. I just love the idea that they're just plotting against each other nonstop. That might be the only true comedic point of Eric Adams' run, which, if you heard me yesterday, you know I have been cracking on nonstop because the man had the worst scam. He literally sold out his future for some fucking air miles. One of the funniest things I've ever heard. But anyway, I've just been like, wait a second. If you take, like, this is actually going to happen. This is actually going to happen. And I just thought, like, and women can't get free birth control? Like, what are we doing here? Is this the ratriarchy? Is this the ratriarchy? Is that how you say it then? Right? Is this rat feminism? Are these rat, right? Like, where rat girls and women don't have to spend their entire lives pumping out 15,000 children a year, y'all. Just pups everywhere. No, they've had it. They've had their feminist revolution. The ratriarchy is over. The rats are coming through. What's fascinating, though, is that they're going to essentially be like spreading these pellets all around. But in the event that there are rats that don't like it, these are highly intelligent creatures, and they're exceptional at passing on information to each other. And in the event that there's a subset of rats that do not like the birth control pellets, they will just breed an empire of pellet-resistant and pellet-hating rats. This is the type of tomfoolery and the kind of wars that I can get down with. Give me cartoon wars, and you've got it. You've got me happy. Now, there's something I'm upset about. Speaking of cartoon wars and how far I'm willing to go to, in the hopes that this is not true, The Simpsons apparently announced a season finale. I refuse to accept this. So Fox has been trying to end it for years. If you don't know, I am a massive Simpsons fan. I've watched it my entire life. And, like, The Simpsons ending is my 9/11. Like, truly my 9/11. This is the one silver lining I've got in 2021. Matt Groening, yes, I do know what Matt Groening said in 2021. But anyway, he said, my standard answer is there's no end in sight because anytime I speculate on the show ending, the people who work on it and diehard fans get very upset. That's me. I am the person that he's referring to in the end right there. So I always say there's no end in sight. Season 37 of The Simpsons has not been announced, so we're at season 36. This has nothing to do with major news. This is absolutely a moment of me abusing my platform. Anyway, look, there is something that we need to talk about. There's something that we need to talk about because sometimes I forget in the need to speak down and break down the news and let you know what's going on, it can be harder to frame things in the way that I want. So what does it mean that the leader of Hezbollah is dead? Does it mean that the war is over? Does it mean that we're good to go? Here's the mistake that America made dealing with Lebanon and that region, really the Levant region, all these years ago. They believe that entities like Hezbollah are defeatable. They actually aren't. No nation state is set up to deal with a massive paramilitary force that is not at all a nation state. So in a way, they exist outside the realm of diplomacy. They exist outside the realm of negotiations. And it is based in fervent belief, right? A fervent belief. So every time that America has been in that region, they have failed. So what makes this time different? That's the question, right? Because there's a way that the West does not fully understand the type of social solidarity or political will that is very much spiritual. So here's the thing. So this is why I'm very concerned, because it seems like Israel right now is gearing up to actually go on the ground in Lebanon. And that's when we're going to see some serious death. And that's when it's going to be, actual death on both sides of the envelope. So unlike Gaza, right? Think of Gaza. It's blockaded. It's called an open air prison. It's a very small strip of land that people have literally been caged in and are being bombed as if they're not human beings, as if they're sitting ducks, right? So, but Lebanon has open borders with Syria, right? So this can allow Iran to more easily replenish Hezbollah's arsenal, right? And allow it to wage a prolonged war. At the stage of this, like when you have a spiritual movement, right? They don't care if they're on the losing side. They will never stop fighting. And impacting human beings with the level of violence that Israel has subjected Arabic people to will ensure a future of extremism, because that's what extremism begets. Extremism begets extremism. And I think, and I'm going to get into this in a moment, in that whole Ta-Nehisi versus America as being cute, but it's really, he was in an interview, it was a whole thing. But my point is, there's this idea that we are not seeing Jewish extremism, and we are. We know that Islamic fundamentalism is extremism. We know that Christian fundamentalism is extremism. We now are seeing what Jewish or Judaic fundamentalism looks like. It looks like this. I think I want to push back on our use of the term Zionist. I'm going to talk about why once I play the Ta-Nehisi Coates clip. I'm not there yet, but I think we need to evolve the language, but let me get back into this and then we'll get into that. So, and remember that Hezbollah, right? So when I talk about how easy it is to replenish through Syria, remember that Hezbollah is the fighting arm of Iran, right? So even if Iran does not come directly to Hezbollah's aid, the country's guards, like its revolutionary guards, may be able to activate its sort of axis of resistance, weakened as it is. So that's Hezbollah. So like it very much could be, and coordinate fighters from across Syria, Iraq, Yemen to help out in Lebanon. And we know that Yemen just got bombed by Israel. And we know why now, and we know why America is so keen on ensuring that this mass murder continues, right? It means that they get a line of trade. That's basically it, that you can move goods here and that they'll own the market in the Middle East. And so Israel sees Saudi Arabia as part of that because Saudi Arabia has fucking nuclear power and oil money. They're good. They don't want to take on the Saudis, which is hilarious to me because remember how America spent years and years telling us how evil and deranged Saudi was. And how they've literally, at different points in times, disappeared journalists. Now, of course, they're doing this whole rebranding thing. I haven't looked enough into it. Like, I can see it through boxing. I know that's a weird thing, but they're really doing a lot for boxing. And so I don't know how I feel about that because I'm like, boxing or human rights. I think I'm going to go with human rights, despite the fact that I love boxing. But it amazes me that America, how quickly and easily America talks out of both sides of its mouth. So, as a result of like all of these factors, right, Hezbollah, despite this massive blow, and I do not want to undercut how serious it is for them to lose their leader of 30 years, they are in a position to survive. And they can survive even the most Israeli air assault. So Netanyahu quoted himself a number of times, and he's talked about this concept of, quote, total victory, right? He believes that it can happen. He's trying to tell you and me and the rest of the world and everyone in America that defeating Hezbollah is possible, that a total victory against them is possible. And I'm just like, no, it's not. The only way to ensure that that's true, even remotely, is to launch a ground invasion, right? And there are signs at present that indicate that Israel's military is preparing to do just that. So what you're going to see is this unbelievable prolonged occupation of, at the very least, some parts of Lebanon, of South Lebanon in particular. So great. Just think. Israel encroaching on Gaza. Israel encroaching on the West Bank. Israel now encroaching on Lebanon. And in the event that they were to do that, in the event that they were to march those troops over there, you would see an unbelievable amount of catastrophic death and consequences mainly for Lebanon's civilian population. That, I have struggled right alongside you, just trying to catch up with the news, right? Catch up with what's going on. Now I'm like, I've caught up, I'm right there on the edge, and I can see where we're headed. And that is a horrible feeling, because I'm like, oh, we're still here, where the mass slaughtering of Arab people is simply a means to an end in the West. And make no mistake, Israel sees itself as the West. It's treated as the West, and it talks about democracy as if it's the only place in the Middle East that has that. You know from my little history lesson the other day that democracies existed before America's meddling and before people tried to extrapolate the resources from there, right, from that region, and sow discord to put in the folks that they felt best. And it made an opening for fundamentalists who were not simply like, hey, this is our chance. They were like, these people are bad for us, right? They come in here and they take our things and they disrespect our culture and they disrespect our women. They had support as a result. People in those regions needed protection, and Islamic fundamentalists said, hey, we can give you that. We can provide that for you. And so the civilians were put into this impossible situation. So here's the thing that's pissing me off, in addition to everything else that I just mentioned. None of this guarantees long-term security for Israel. In fact, it guarantees the absolute opposite. We've said again and again and again, if you murder people's entire families needlessly, you ensure the next generation of revolutionary fighters. That's called the human spirit. That's called human spirit. It's why we've won every right that we've had. I'm so angry, and I'm just going to tell you, right, that this isn't Israel's first attempt at this at all. Like, they have failed over and over. So in June 1982, Israel invaded and occupied parts of Lebanon, right? And that includes, for a very brief moment in time, Beirut, which is the capital of Lebanon, right? And they tried that for the next 18 years. The occupation was an absolute strategic failure, right? That's what gave rise to Hezbollah in the first place and led to the death of thousands of civilians. So we're in this moment, right, where we're right back here again, and I can fast forward from 1982 to 2000, and you saw the same thing. Hezbollah's guerrilla warfare forced Israel to withdraw. And the same pattern played out, right, to a lesser degree, right, when Israel sent forces into Lebanon again in 2006. That led to actually 100 Israeli casualties. So let me get this right. You murdered, you slaughtered 40,000 people, 41,000 people, and that is a lowball of Gazans, of Palestinians, because of what Hamas did on October 7th, right? Let's like pause for a second and pretend that that's the only point that matters in history, which for fuck's sakes we know is not. My God, the way that Western media has tried to push that down our fucking throats. But imagine that they're like, not another Israeli life, but in the same breath are literally sending their own people to just doing a death march over and over and over again in Lebanon. So this total victory that Netanyahu and his cabinet are seeking, not only will that not bring any security to Israel, it just ends in more and results in more death and is more in more fundamentalism. And you've got to ask yourself, well, hey, why would Israel be so fucking willing to do this again, knowing that they failed every time? And I can't help but think that it's because right now America is bankrolling Israel more than it ever has, and is providing more weapons than it ever has. And well, if I was feeling tired, if I was feeling a little worn out, if I was feeling a little frustrated today, that just grinds my gears and keeps me fucking moving, because absolutely not, right? I am so disgusted. And the only thing that's going to come out of this military campaign is millions of traumatized Arabs who will watch their brothers and sisters get slaughtered. They've already watched their brothers and sisters in Palestine and Lebanon be slaughtered with absolute and complete impunity, right? You can't ensure your safety by annihilating anybody you deem inconvenient, anyone that is too brown for you, anyone from a different religion. Let's be very clear. That is the only thing that's happening here. This is the reason why. So I'll just end this segment where we started, right, on the matter of Israel versus the entirety of the Middle East. Here's a quote from the rat birth control story, right, from council member Sean Abreu. He said back in April, "We can't poison our way out of this. We cannot kill our way out of this." Imagine that the rat man on the city council of New York has far more intelligence than the killer cabinet that exists in Israel. So I'm going to give you now a little piece of a really adversarial fight. So Ta-Nehisi Coates, and it absolutely ties into what we were just talking about. So Ta-Nehisi Coates gets on CBS, Morning or whatever, to talk about his new book, The Message. And in this book, right, there's like 3 segments, but one of them is like, where his book has been banned, and he goes and visits, I don't know, I think it's North Carolina or something like that. I haven't read it yet because the water dancer, whatever his fiction was, like really traumatized me. It was so badly written. But we all know Between the World and Me was fine. It was like a solid book. I know everyone on all the libs were just like, he's the new James Baldwin. I'm like, has he sucked a dick yet? Because if not, I don't want to hear that. Okay. Anyway, he's a brilliant writer and he's a brilliant man. And you know that I'm quite fond of him because he rejected all of that by talking about reparations when literally no one else would. But anyway, he talks about this. One of the chapters talks about the book bans and, whatever. But the bulk of his work, right, in The Message is his experience going to Israel and being in Palestine. And he visited several of the same places I do. I was in Hebron. I was in Rafah, I was in Nazareth, I was in Bethlehem, Haifa, I was in Haifa, and I also was in Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. And so, he named some of the places that he's been in. But essentially, he's talking about his experience and what he saw there and this unbelievable, just rapacious, awful, cruel, and evil system that Palestinians are subject to living in Israel. So let me just hit that first clip so you can hear how that went on CBS.
Why do the Palestinians have a right to exist? Why do 20 different Muslim countries have a right to exist?
My answer is that no country in this world establishes its ability to exist through rights. Countries establish their ability to exist through force, as America did. And so I think this question of right to Israel does exist. It's a fact. The question of its right is not a question that I would be faced with any other country.
But you write a book that delegitimizes the pillars of Israel. It seems like an effort to topple the whole building of it. So I come back to the question, and it's what I struggled with throughout this book. What is it that so particularly offends you about the existence of a Jewish state that is a Jewish safe place and not any of the other states out there?
There's nothing that offends me about a Jewish state. I am offended by the idea of states built on ethnocracy, no matter where they are.
Muslim included.
I would not want a state where any group of people laid down their citizenship rights based on ethnicity. The country of Israel is a state in which half the population exists on one tier of citizenship, and everybody else that's ruled by Israelis exists on another tier, including Palestinian Israeli citizens. The only people that exist on that first tier are Israeli Jews.
Right. Okay. So in every argument, every debate, we go through this thing. Does Israel have a right to exist, right? You're challenging Israel's right to exist. And you keep, and you've seen it play over and over and over again in Western media. And maybe you've had a debate with your friend. Maybe this has come up and you see it happen again and again and again. You go back to Israel's right to exist. And I've always found this particular thing such a derail, a mislead, a redirect, right, that puts us on the defensive. And for the record, I think Ta-Nehisi did a really phenomenal job there. But these folks who were interviewing him on CBS Morning were harder on Ta-Nehisi Coates than they were Ivanka Trump, right? Like, do you see that? Do you see how that happens? Like, one got coddled even though her father is a fucking fascist, right? It's not like she was just some bypasser she was there. She was not she was an unofficial member, right? Of his really thrown together haphazard regime. But they were harder on him. And rather than engage with what he writes about, which is the experiences of Palestinians, they go, well, but Israel, you're attacking its right to exist. You're attacking its right to exist. So before I go on, right, because I want to break everything down, I just want to tee up that last clip so you can hear it, and then I'm going to essentially rip these folks apart.
Less than a mile away from him again.
And why
is that okay?
Why is that? Why is there no agency in this book for the Palestinians? They exist in your narrative merely as victims of the Israelis, as though they were not offered peace at any juncture, as though they don't have a stake in this as well. What is their role in the lack of a Palestinian?
I have a very, 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 very moral compass about this. And again, perhaps it's because of my ancestry. Either apartheid is right or it's wrong.
And that's just it. Either apartheid is right or apartheid is wrong. So what happens, and I noticed that Ta-Nehisi, because he was pushed on the back foot in this back and forth, he was in a position, right? So they basically are like, so this whole thing starts and the guy goes, well, you don't mention in your book at all that Israel is surrounded by enemies. And then he made another argument, which you just heard, which is that, what about Palestinians? And essentially blaming Palestinians for their own genocide, right? Where are they in this? Where are they in this? This is not a question that you would ask of those folks in South Africa during apartheid. You would not say that now. You might then. I want to be very clear. You might then. And we're living through the most sophisticated system of apartheid this world has ever seen. Truly, that can withstand just about anything, right? Don't forget that South African apartheid ended largely because of global sanctions and global pressure. But America blocks that against Israel. So he made the argument, right, that you don't mention what has happened to Israelis because of their place in the Middle East. So that's the first one. Then he goes, they don't even, you don't mention Palestinian agency. And then the last one, of course, is you keep challenging Israel's right to exist. And here's the thing. I'm not interested in that argument, right? And I like what he says. It's the closest, what Ta-Nehisi said was the closest thing to what I personally believe, which, that nation states can only exist and that only manifest through violence. And that is a very Western conception of, nationhood, nation state. These are things that did not exist at particular points in time, despite the fact that you had different hierarchies and different subsets and different civilizations. And that's where people get into the weird moralizing about, well, we were always like this or that or whatever bullshit they say. Here's the facts. Once a nation state exists, it exists, right? That's it. It runs its course. And as I believe that there's a future for Palestinians, 100%, but that's because I believe in Palestinians. Israel's going to do whatever it can to absolutely ensure the eradication of Palestinians up to a point. What is that point? What is it? Until they have absolute rule, right? Until they have absolute rule over everything, until they've moved into everywhere they want to move into and everything. So what do we do when people say, you know, this thing about right to exist? I actually absorb the argument. So a lot of people go against it. I actually put myself in front of it. I absorb it because the whole point is to keep you on your back foot. So rather than reject the notion that Israel exists, right? Which some people say, well, Jewish people have been out and these horrible things have happened to Jewish people over the last, centuries. We know that to be true. But then you have to ask, okay, so do all displaced people, Jewish people don't have anywhere to go. Okay, so do all displaced people deserve their own nation state? That's where you get them once, right? That's where you get them once. The second way that you push back on that is, again, not to reject and not to go death for death, but to say, for those, Israel has a right to exist, Israel should exist, and Jewish people need a place to go. So one, we've already sort of pigeonholed and identified the fact that they believe there's something unique about the Jewish experience that justifies this like nation state, right? So that puts them a little bit back. The second one is, okay, does that justify the eradication of Palestinians? And if that's too far, then stick to what we know to be absolutely true, right? Some people might still contest that. But like I said, this isn't about simply saying my politics or my beliefs. It's really about destroying these arguments. I like winning arguments. And so it's okay, is 41,000 deaths worth it to you? It puts the people in a position where rather than, they have to own it. You have to own the fact that you believe that the Jewish experience is exceptional or different or unique somehow, which it absolutely is not. And then then that person would have to say, well, yes, it is worth it to me. And then you know who you're dealing with, right? That's just some stuff. A friend suggested that you folks would benefit from hearing like how I've engaged in these debates or these arguments before. And I will, once we start inviting folks onto the show, which we're going to do, I can model that in real time. But what I have realized is, and this is very sad for me, it's a sad day for me, is that I need to start making political content again. I hate the internet for that because it can be so reductive. But I'm realizing we're not seeing the right kinds of models or people who know the right kinds of history, because of course that's the other side that folks really get you on. But it's a fascinating thing to me, right? This idea that like Jewish people deserve a place to go, and that for a lot of Jewish people that became Israel, right? That became that was the answer, the response, which truly was an Israel, the conception of it was an anti-Semite's wet dream. Europe did not want Jewish people back on the continent. They didn't want to deal with them. And so people saw opportunities as is. And it just amazes me how horseshoe our politics have gotten. Because here's the last piece I'll say about this. Why, and I'm not saying that this is why, but just for the sake of my argument, right? Because I'm not in Ta-Nehisi's head, but like he didn't bring up South African apartheid. He did bring up the Jim Crow era and like personalized it to him, which I thought, was very meaningful. But why we treat this as different is because Jewish people have been harmed throughout the centuries. And it's like, well, they're aggrieved and therefore this justifies that. And it's like, no, actually apartheid is apartheid, period. I had a guy, right? He's a really beautiful man, an Israeli who is pro-Palestine, but still wants Israel to exist. And we had this huge debate, which I actually have the recording of. And, it's really odd to like have all those contradictions, right? Like he's done an incredible amount of humanitarian work. He's partly why Brittany Griner was brought back home. So he does a lot of stuff on back end global relations and dealing with, dictator-like countries, to try to get families reunited. That's it, right? He said, you have to remember, I better not be giving this banger away before I play the clip, but whatever, right? We're all in this shit. Fuck it. He said, you have to understand that from the Jewish perspective, we don't count from Every time you see a death, we don't count from one, we count from 6 million. So it's 6 million one, 6 million two. And he really, there was a moment, because it was a recording, everyone went, whoa. And I said, okay, so what if the black diaspora did that? What if the African diaspora did that? We counted from 60 million. And he went silent. And it's because he'd never, this is a good man. It never occurred to him to think about somebody else's experience that meaningfully. And I think that's just it, right? Like, I get into debates a lot of time, but I'm like, what we're seeing is white apartheid. There's just, I'm not white and this, that, I'm mixed with this. It's like, no, and you're white. Like, you're white. In America, you're white, right? We can talk about how weird it gets in Europe and everything else with ethnicity, but it's just fascinating because I'm like, what we're seeing is actually apartheid. We're seeing white supremacy. We're seeing genocide. But because there's been this backlash of just speaking facts, and because Jewish people have suffered, right? It means that, well, we can't say that. And I'm going to tell you something about Jewish people in America, right? Some of the most gangster fucking people out there, truly, right? I mean, Jewish people across the world are fighting Israel as just about as hard as anybody else. But I'll say this, it's a very fascinating thing, because like bisexuals, Jewish people know what it is to be hated but not oppressed, not in an American context, because of that classification of white. And so that means that they were kept out, they were precluded from engaging, right? They were precluded from engaging fully within that 1%, that whiteness, that ruling class. They were like, no, well, you can kind of be here for strategic purposes, but you can't really be here, which is why Jewish folks were like, okay, cool, well, we'll make our own shit then. Hollywood, this, that, and the other. But those things were born very much out of anti-Semitism. What is less spoken about or less understood is the fact that Jewish people and black people went from marching on the streets together in the ghettos until Jewish people became our landlords, right? And that is me using a metaphor or an anecdote to say, which, it actually does speak to what happened in New York in a lot of ways, but that Jewish folks were hated, but that didn't mean that they were a part of the experience of redlining. That doesn't mean that they were precluded from getting loans, right? That didn't mean that they were precluded from accumulating wealth over periods of time. And that's not every Jew. Please don't be silly, right? I know too many poor Jews. In fact, I need some rich Jewish people in my life because that means they got taste and money. Okay, so what are we doing here? I know too many poor whites. I'm just kidding. I fucking love the poor whites, except for the ones that are racist. I don't like those ones. But anyway, hold on. Let me just check in. How am I doing on time, Kaden? Where are we at? Fuck. Oh, shit. Okay, I actually can't get to the gerrymandering piece today. It's okay. It's not a story that's going anywhere, but it's pretty dope. We'll plug into it, but basically it's like, just because a red state is a red state doesn't mean that there aren't gangster people doing good work, and it's about a woman named Kate Barr, but I'll get into that tomorrow. For now, I yapped. This is what I mean when I said the political framing. It turns out that 30 minutes is a hard line to hit, but I'll just say this. Tomorrow, we had the VP debate. I will be covering it just immediately after, so you get it the day before, but I'm very keen on it. I'm pissed off because they don't have live fact checking, and they're like, scan this QR code, and I'm like, you're not a fucking restaurant, okay? I don't want to fact check through a fucking page online, and they're not going to do what we saw where Trump was fact checked several times by ABC, which was so good. JD Vance is a fucking liar who says, I just use stories to illustrate whatever, and I don't see that as a problem. Okay, cool. You're a liar and a jester, and honestly, the only person I know who somehow does not look good in eyeliner, it literally looks good on fucking everybody. You raccoon-ass bitch. Anyway, so it's going to be good. I will say this. I was unfortunate, I have to admit it, but JD Vance is actually pretty solid at debate, and Tim Walz is fucking an exceptional little guy. So it's going to be very juicy, and they don't need to play the same kind of like respect rules because neither of them are running for president. So take the fucking gloves off, Tim, and bare knuckles that shit. Why don't we hit that question of the day right quick?
Hello, I'm Penny, and I have a question. Now that the Taliban is enforcing strict religious regulations on dress and behavior onto Afghani men, what do you think the men were thinking all that time when women were losing all their rights? what were they thinking then, and what do you think they're thinking now?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Penny. And like, I think this question can apply to so many situations. I mean, it can definitely apply here in America, which is like, you see women getting their rights stripped left, right, and center. And the question is, do men think for a moment that that could happen to them? No, they don't. Not just because testosterone is the dumb hormone, but largely because we as people have a really hard time understanding future and don't want to deal with things until it's right in front of our door. And I want to fight for a world where I'm so I'm so gutted by what I'm seeing coming out of Asheville, North Carolina, just bodies, and how many times insurance companies, how many times governments. Republicans in particular, Republicans actually completely, and how they deny human being services when we see that, and support when we see it happening everywhere in the world. And it occurred to me that we're living in this world where we're seeing footage of natural disasters, and they just get closer and closer and closer to your home until one day you're the one recording that footage. And so I think for a lot of men, we're all so accustomed to the subjugation of women that the subjugation of men doesn't actually occur to us. But it's like that system doesn't have brakes. So if they go after women first, that's just the first ones, then it's going to be a certain kind of man, right? Maybe a black man, maybe an Asian man, maybe a small man, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is a system that just continuously expands. And I love that question so much because it actually points to that we make such clear delineations in our mind as if, well, that's happening over there, but that's not here, that's not me. And it's like, no, if they're coming for you, if they're coming for me tonight, they'll be at your door in the morning, right? I think that's like a paraphrase of June Jordan. Anyway, I love that question, and it made me think, and I think it's a great way to sort of tee up what's happening tomorrow. But yes, unfortunately, I'm coming back. I have to start making political content online again. I can't just be like cute and light-skinned and annoying. Anyway, we're here, and honestly, I hope this sort of framing works better than me, only talking about the news. There's obviously a balance. I'm going to perfect both, I promise. But we did learn about rat birth control, and I think that is a fucking win. So with that, why don't we cue that end music? I just want to say, y'all, thank you so much for listening to JFK Today. It means the world to me. This show really is a labor of love. New episodes drop 4 times a week. We're available everywhere podcasts are. Drop your voice note questions to jfktodayshow@gmail.com. I love the questions. They're getting good, y'all. Shout out to Carolyn and KR and the JFK team. And shout out to you, the listeners that make it all possible. Love you. Peace.